Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. And today we are doing a Meta Monday number 14. This is our first Meta Monday since the most recent big Mercenaries drop a few weeks ago. So it's been some time, things have started to settle a little bit. More people have leveled up their Mercenaries and all that good stuff, so we're finally starting to see a bit more information about how things are starting to change in the Mercenaries meta in the stats. Now, early on, these stats are pretty subject to change, but figured it was a good time where enough time has passed where we can at least get a decent idea of what some of the popular new comps people are playing are, as well as how successful and popular they are. So we're going to get right on into it here. Before we do, if you enjoy this type of content, remember to like and subscribe. Does a ton to help out the channel and keeps the Mercenaries videos coming. But yeah, diving right on into it, this is from the top 10% MMR on HS Replay, and this is from the most recent patch until the time that this is going up. So about 10 days or so. The last patch was on the 13th, and this is being recorded on the 23rd, so a little bit under 2 weeks of data here, about 10 days. And I think this information really paints an interesting picture. So we're going to go through it, take a look at the list, popularity, win rates, all that stuff, and then we're going to take a look at our graph and see, kind of what it's looking like in terms of population for these decks. So, starting out, the most popular deck is a Frost deck that makes use of actually two new units here in Nemzi and Khadgar as the openers, as well as Lokalar for your third Frost unit. And then the bench, something we've kind of seen before, the Bane Tyrande combo, which really solid late game combo there, and Sinestra as their final green. This one's coming in at 57% win rate and is the most popular comp in this MMR bracket at 1100 games. Then we have another Frost deck here. This one is a bit more traditional. Varden Jaina Lokalar with a Karen Diablo Sinestra bench. And this one's coming in at 52% win rate in 920 games. This is, I think, another example of, some old bots are still running this one. There's a chance maybe it's more effective than it used to be, but this is like the textbook old bot comp. I don't know if there are more people just botting it, or if maybe it's a little bit better now, so some players are coming back to it. But it's not something I've personally seen very much of on ladder, so I'm really surprised it is this high up. But we have seen something like this before, where comps used, even this specific comp, since it's used by bots, it ends up having a pretty high number of games played. But I am surprised it's still hovering over 50%, because it's a lot more beatable than it used to be back in the day. Then we have the Old Gods comp. This is pretty much your standard Old Gods build from last meta, making use of Yogg, N'Zoth, and Yasha Raj in the opener, and then having Vol'jin, Cthulhu, and Maestra on the bench. You end up switching out your Yogg usually for your Maestra, and then you get to go off with your Old God skill 3 on turn 2. So very, very strong. There is a little bit more counterplay to this now with things like Medivh and whatnot, but it still seems to be doing really well because, as we can see here, it is one of the highest win rates on this chart. Just under 60%, coming in at 59.3, and that is over 740 games. Next up, we have probably the comp that uses the most new Mercenaries, I think, out of most of the ones on this list, and that is going to be a new take on Arcane. So this actually has a Medivh, Blinkfox, Khadgar open, which is pretty cool to see. And then the bench is Tyrande, Ysera, and Bane. So Ysera is really kind of surprised. I think a lot of people, myself included. She's been a lot better than I initially expected for different reasons than I expected. I think part of that is due to some unclear wording on her skill 3 when we saw it in kind of pre-release before we actually got to play with it and experience it. But this one's coming in at 57% win rate over 670 games. Then we have the kind of old new Frost Valeera with the Grom Valeera Trigor open into Varden Belinda Maestra bench. This one kind of a classic Valeera Frost type of thing. You're enabling her turn 1, dealing a lot of damage with Grom, Trigor, and Maestra. And then you're trying to get a double switch in with Valeera and one of your Frost units. Start freezing, scaling, locking your opponent out. This one's coming in at just under 56% win rate over 520 games. This one I'm a little surprised to see it go up compared to where it used to be. I think this is one of those comps that it gets a lot of free wins by people not knowing how to play around it optimally. If you don't know, the best way to play around this comp is to kill their units one by one and deny them from having that double switch in with one of their Frost units and Valeera later on in the game. That really kind of makes this comp fall apart. I think there's a good chance it is beating up on more experimental builds right now, so that is probably why it has had a bit of an increase in play rate and win rate. But yeah, next up we have Nature. So this one's actually really cool. We haven't really seen a nature-focused lead in a very, very long time. And now, thanks to Boggy and Nemzi, it looks like we're starting to see that again, and it's actually performing pretty well. So this version of it is Brukan, Malfurion, and Nemzi with a Cookie, Ysera, Bane bench. I quite like this list, however, having played with and against it, as well as doing some of my own experimentation, I think Elise is almost a strictly better choice than Brukan in this slot from what I've experienced with the deck. But it seems even with Brukan, it's still putting up some decent numbers, coming in at a 58% win rate over 500 games. Then we have some more Frost stuff, just different variation on the opener. Belinda, Localar, Khadgar, Cookie, Sinestra, Bane bench. And you're probably seeing a trend here in the different comps for the most part. Or I know I am. There are a lot of Frost comps making use of Khadgar, Nemzi, pretty popular, Medivh, and Ysera. These seem to be, 4 of the standout mercenaries, and the stats definitely seem to reflect that. And this one is coming in at 60% win rate, so this one's doing actually the best on the page here, over 480 games. And then the last one on this page, we have Valeera Trigor Bwansamdi with a Varden Belinda Maestra bench. So for this one, I think you're doing some bounce shenanigans with Bwansamdi. Maybe the idea is to get either multiple Maestra procs, or you can use Bwansamdi to guarantee you're getting your Frost Valeera stuff going as early as turn 2, so you don't actually have to rely on your opponent killing 2 of your things. You can just switch out all your Frost units and Valeera and start going ham with it. I haven't seen this one myself, so I don't really have much insight into it, but it does seem to be performing worse than the other version of Frost Valeera, coming in at 51% win rate over 460 games. Then we have some more stats here. Take a look at these. We have this is kind of an older version. We have the Trigor Eudora Elise with the Pirate bench of Sneed, Edwin, Maestra. Pirates did pretty decent last meta, though they weren't exactly top tier, but they don't seem to be doing very well in this newly emerging one, coming in at 47% win rate over 260 games. Then we have the Nagas. Nagas are actually holding strong, it seems. They have one of the higher win rates on this list, coming in with a Shara Reno Elise opener with the Vosh, Athissa, and Bane bench. Pretty standard stuff. Was one of the best decks of the last meta. This one's coming in at just over 61% win rate and 230 games played. Then we have basically an exact copy of the old gods that we saw before. However, the one difference here is they're running the different Yasharaj equipment. So this one, it gives him more attack that he steals from his skill 1, whereas the more popular variant uses the extra attack on his skill 3. I think if you're running old gods, the skill 3 one is going to naturally be better most of the time, and Here we can see the win rate is pretty similar. The other one had 59%. This has a bit over 60, but it's also a much lower sample size, coming in at 220 games. So I wouldn't be surprised if that actually went down as the amount of games went up, because I do think the one on top was the superior version. Then we have another take on the Arcane comp. So this one, we have Medivh, Blinkfox, Khadgar, Tyrande, Ysera, and Bane. Now this, much like the old God comp, you might notice this is pretty much the same comp we saw at the top. It does have a little bit worse win rate, and I think the main reason for that is, much like the old Gods one, this is an item swap. So instead of running Tyranda's nature double up ability, they're running the extra damage for her, I believe it's skill 2, the arcane shot. And I don't think that makes very much sense, personally. I think like the whole reason you're running Tyrande on a team like this generally is to double up on your powerful nature abilities like Ysera and Bane. So I'm not really surprised this one seems to be doing a bit worse and is less popular, coming in at just under 54% win rate at 210 games. Then we have, like Shadow with Bwonsamdi, the Kazakus, Ashara, Bwonsamdi, Boljan, Yasharaj, and Tess. Kind of cool seeing Tess making it in here. And this comp actually, I believe, is the highest win rate comp out of the whole list, which is pretty surprising. It's kind of interesting to see different take on Shadow here. And I think a big reason for this that we're not seeing the Yasharaj open is now Yasharaj is a bit more counterable with some of the new mercenaries. He isn't the powerhouse open he always used to be. And I think Bwonsamdi can help you get around that, because you can kind of open with him, and then you can see if the opponent is weak to Yasharaj. If they don't have a counter to him, then you can just kind of switch out whenever you want, and you even get some bonus Kazakus stats from doing that, which is pretty nice. Surprised to see Tess in this comp, but it's pretty cool. I haven't personally ran into this one in ladder very much, so we'll have to see how it goes before kind of get some more idea of how it's doing. But the numbers look good. 61.5% win rate, though the sample size is pretty low at 210 games. This one kind of surprised me. Arcane. So Arcane has gone up and down. There's certain points it's been a real big meta tyrant, and there are other points it's sitting kind of like where it is now, with a rather unimpressive win rate and a lower sample size. So standard stuff here: Trigor, Neferi, and Reno with the Karen, Tyrande, Longjin bench, coming in at 46.5% win rate and 210 games. Surprised to see Arcane really not doing very well, but I do think there are just a lot of better comps out there, and it really didn't gain much from this recent expansion. And then last, but actually least here, I think, with the lowest percent win rate, is a very old version of Valeera Frost. So Valeera, Trigor, Belinda with Jaina, Localar, Sinestra bench. This one's trying to make use of the Belinda elemental on turn 1. But one trend you might notice here is there really aren't a lot of comps in this meta that have double green openers, and I think it's just because they get punished really hard. So even though you're dealing a lot of damage, you're potentially doing some action denial, I think it's too frail for the long term, and the Frost bench with Sinestra isn't really enough to swing it back around in your favor if you happen to fall behind later on in the game. This one's coming in at 45% win rate and 210 games played. So yeah, those are some win rate numbers. Let's take a look at the metagame share percentage. Before we do, I do want to mention there is one deck that is not on here, but I do think warrants a spot and is going to be potentially a key player in the metagame, and that is the Fast Elise Monkey combo deck. And I think that's actually part of the reason that we're seeing so much Localar right now, and Frost in general, because that is one of the few ways you can actually relatively consistently end up countering this comp. Because Fast Monkey, if you haven't seen it, I did a video on it, so you can check that out. I'll have it in the video description if you want to take a look at how that comp works. But it's a pretty disgusting combo that seeks to do a bounce on turn 1, get Valeera enabled, then you get in the Elise and Tyrande. You can use Tyranda's ability to double up Elise's skill 3. Elise already starts with the monkey equipment, so she's already at 3 out of 5. It gets her to 5 out of 5, and then you just get to blow them up with the golden monkey at 1 speed, essentially, on turn 3, which is pretty busted, and you have Boggy there to help defend you too, so it's kind of hard to interact with for a lot of comps. So that's one that, even though it's not on the stats right now, I would not be surprised if we see that come up later on as time progresses. Alright, so it's time to take a look at our metagame representation graph. So again, these are the HS Replay top 10% stats for October 10th or October 13th through October 23rd. And it paints kind of an interesting picture. This is one of those things where, you know, on the surface, you look at this graph and you're like, oh, there's, you know, quite a lot of different comps here. There must be a lot of diversity going on. But I think it was made kind of clear in the section we just went through that there actually isn't a whole lot of that. I mean, yes, there are new comps and there is some diversity, but we're noticing a trend that we kind of have seen in metas past, where it's the same handful of top tier characters with a few new additions from the new drop. Most notably, like I mentioned before, we have Nemzi, we have Khadgar, we have Bwonsamdi, we have Ysera. Those are kind of sticking out as some of the major players from the most recent drop. But we have one of the Frost variants here. I actually forgot to put the last 3 in here, but the last 3 on this team are the Tyrande Sinestra Bane bench. I'm still personally pretty surprised that that is the most popular variant, because I do think the Ysera version is better in a lot of cases. So maybe there's something I'm missing here as to why people are choosing to go with Sinestra over Ysera. But from what I've seen and what I've played, I prefer the Ysera bench, but that one's coming in at just under 16% of the metagame. And then we have that weird Frost Karen Diablo Sinestra comp that I swear is still only this high up because people bought with it, and people are probably too lazy to change their bots. But it seems to be doing a bit better than before, looking at the win rate. So this one's coming in at 13.3%. So those two alone are making up almost, you know, about a quarter, a bit more than a quarter of the metagame. So that's actually kind of surprising to me. And then we have the old gods coming in with the Yasharaj with the extra attack on skill 3 at just over 10%, with Arcane following close behind it at just under 10% over 670 games. I do think the Arcane one is one of the more interesting comps that we've seen, and out of these top 4, I think it and the Nemzi Khadgar one are 2 of the more interesting ones, because they're really relying a lot more on new mercs and synergies and all that stuff. But it is a shame we are still seeing so many of the same mercenaries that we've seen for a very long time here. And I kind of talk about that a little bit in yesterday's video as well, about the prospect of, are we ever going to see nerfs in mercenaries? But don't want to get into that too much. You can check that out if you haven't seen it. Moving down the line here, we have the Frost Valeera with Grom. That one coming in at 7.5% of the metagame share. So basically, those first 4 are representing half of the metagame, at least according to the HS Replay stats. Obviously, this may vary where you're at in the ladder, as this is top 10%. But then continuing down the line here, I was really happy to see Nature. So seeing the Brukan Nature comp have a good win rate and a decent metagame share here at 7.2%, I was really happy to see this. I was always a fan of Nature builds, and I kind of wish they would be able to come back, as we've seen Nature benches, and I used to play a Nature build around the release of the big drop before this most recent one, but it just wasn't very popular. It definitely fell off in power level, so it's really cool to see bringing back a previously very powerful mercenary in Brukan, and people are having success with him, even though, like I said before, I think Elise is generally a better fit for this type of comp, and especially in the mirror match when you're up against a Brucon and you have an Elise, at least from what I've played, it seems like the Elise version has the advantage. Then we have the Belinda Locke Khadgar with the Cookie Sinistra Bane. So, I mean, we're just seeing a lot of the same stuff here, right? Like, Frost has gotten more powerful because of Khadgar. If we think about it, Frost actually hasn't gotten a dedicated new Frost unit in a long time, and Khadgar, even though he has a variety in his spell schools, his Blizzard and his ability to transform so he can essentially spam the Blizzard and root people is really insane. And I think it kind of speaks for itself in how popular he is in a wide variety of comps here. Kind of interesting that we're seeing less Nemzi here than I initially expected to. So I don't know if that's because she hasn't been performing as much on ladder as she was initially, or what the deal with that is, but I am surprised that there isn't actually more Nemzi here, because we really don't see any kind of the big summon comps with Cho and whatnot. And but again, we also didn't see the Fast Monkey, and I think the Fast Monkey has the potential to be a top tier comp. So it may be the case where the information about these comps just hasn't really spread yet, or it's just something people haven't tried out. But yeah, going back to this one, coming in at just under 7% of the metagame with this version of Frost with the Nature Bench. And then the kind of worse version of Frost Valeera. I think if you're going to play Frost Valeera, this isn't the way to do it. I would play the Grom variant or another variant that I've been testing and I'll probably feature in a video soon. But I don't think Valeera, Trigor, Bonsomdi is the way to go. It just seems kind of strange to me to put Bonsomdi in a comp like this. But apparently, a decent amount of people are doing it because it's coming in at 6.6% of the metagame share. And then there's a pretty big fall off here. Like if we look at the games and we look at the percentage here, it goes from like a little bit under 500 to being cut like almost in half, down to 260. So pretty, usually, you know, we would at least see 1 or 2 in the 300 range. So kind of surprised to actually see that here. But this one is the pirate version. Trigor, Eudora, Elise with Sneed, Enwin, Maestra. 260 games, just under 4%, 3.7%. I think this also kind of speaks to one comp that we've seen completely evaporate from the meta, and this makes me kind of sad to see it, is the big summon, or not big summons, the big humans, or just like the big minion stat comps. It feels like they've generally been replaced by the big Nemzi stat stuff, and even though those comps are interesting, I do think it's a little sad that like big pirates or big humans really don't seem to be seeing play anymore. And I think there are multiple factors why that is the case, but I think the biggest one is the fact that now that there is a spammable AoE root effect with Khadgar's Blizzard, and then when you transform him, you essentially don't have to really worry about the cooldown. I think that is going to be doing a lot of damage to any comps that really care about buffing up their stats and attacking in. So I think Khadgar's prevalence is definitely holding those type of comps down. Then we have the Nagas. So I think this one is a case of it's actually performing really well, but the play rate is low because, frankly, people have had their fill with Nagas for the most part. If you like this deck, if you played a lot of it, you've probably already experienced a lot of the gameplay patterns with it. Now, some things might be a little bit different with new Mercenaries and whatnot, so people still are testing it out and seeming to have success with it. But I think this is just an instance of, if you really like this deck and enjoyed playing it, you probably played it a ton last release, towards the end of that last month or two, and you want to be trying something different. So because of that, it's down to 230 games with 3.3% of the metagame share. And then we have what I would say is the worst version of Old Gods, and I think the games kind of reflect that. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is just an example of the players forgetting to switch their Yasharaj equipment after using him in a base shadow build, and just not thinking about the fact that his other equipment is better for using your skill 3 on turn 2. But that's the only difference between this one and the Old Gods build we have coming in at the 3rd most popular deck. So, I mean, if we combine these, Old Gods are making up just about 14% of the metagame. But I do think this is the strictly worse version. If you're going to play it, go for that extra attack on Yashiraj's Rage Unbound. This one's coming in at 3.2% of the metagame. And then we have, what's this? This one is, oh no, that's the one we just looked at. So then we have, yeah, this was just like the other one, where almost a strictly worse version of the 4th most popular deck, the new Arcane variant. However, they're running more damage on the Tyrande equipment instead of running the doubling your nature effect. I don't think that really makes any sense for this comp. You combine these, they're at about 13%, so very close to Old Gods in terms of total representation. But much like the Old Gods one, I think this is a strictly worse version of the deck, and I'm not surprised that the play rate is so low, because it just makes way more sense to play the other version of the deck. That one's coming in at 3% of the metagame, and I believe all the last ones here are also 3%. Yep. This one, I actually want to try this one out, the Shadow with Bonsamdi, Vol'jin, Yashiraj, Tess. Mainly because I think Tess is a really fun and interesting character, and its win rate was also very impressive, even though the sample size was a bit lower. It was on the lower end, obviously, because it's 3%, but I think this is a neat build. I think, you know, if you enjoyed the Shadow playstyle quite a bit, and you're looking for a little bit of a new way to give that a try, with some fresh new mercenaries, doesn't seem like a bad way to do it, and it's probably something I'm going to try out soon. Then we have the Trigor, Nefarian Reno, Arcane, the Karen, Tyrande, Longjin. This one, yeah, it just really has so many ups and downs that I'm not really super surprised to see it being a bit down now, because there are more powerful blues. I think blues were kind of one of the big winners from the recent drop, and some greens as well. But because of that, Longjin isn't critting quite as many things across all the comps, and it just doesn't seem to be doing well. And it's another one where, much like Naga's, I think it's just like basically a worse version of Naga's, where if you like this deck, you probably played a lot of it last expansion, and nothing has changed. So, I mean, if you still enjoy playing it, great, but for now, the win rate doesn't seem to be that great, and the player population is pretty low at 3%, because people have got their fill of it. They know how it works, and they kind of know if they want to play more of it or not already. And then the kind of weird Valeera, Trigor, Belinda, Valeera Frost with the bench, with more Frost. I actually put Belinda here twice by mistake, but it's supposed to be Sinestra, I believe. Yeah, this is just bad. If you're gonna play Valeera Frost, don't play this version. I think this is one of those situations where people's memory of, hey, you know, Valeera Belinda used to be really, really good as an opener, so let's try jamming it again now, especially with like a buff Trigor. And on paper, I think that makes sense. But in practice, it just doesn't. There are just way better versions of the deck. I think the ground version is significantly better, and you can also see that in the win rate increase as well as play percentage increase. And I think there are some versions of Valeera Frost that haven't been fully experimented with by the larger community of the game that have potential to be even better than the Grom deck, even though I'm not necessarily looking forward to those becoming better and more popular, because I do think they are kind of a bit toxic for the gameplay experience, given their whole game plan is about kind of locking your opponent out of being able to play the game at very fast speeds, which are hard to interact with for a lot of mercenaries. So yeah, that is our kind of Meta Monday overview. If you want to take a look at the graph yourself, there will be a link in the description. But just to give some feelings on what we're seeing so far, I think this information kind of says a lot, at least about the early developing metagame, and I don't necessarily expect things to change a ton. I do think there are some builds that are not showing up here or are underrepresented, so to speak. I kind of mentioned that before, specifically with the monkey build and the big summons build. I do think those are two that will get more popular and will put up some pretty good numbers once some time goes by. But overall, it's a shame to see that, we got a lot of really cool mercenaries this drop, and so it's a little bit disappointing that, at least in this information, we're really only seeing like 5 of them, 5 of the 14 or so. So that's not that great in terms of representation, and like I talked about in the nerfs video, I just think that we're noticing a trend here. We've seen it in the past where some of these characters from past releases, as well as some of the new ones, are just so powerful. It ends up being like there's just a really big gap between high tier and mid tier and low tier in mercenaries. And I think one thing that really does concern me, and we didn't see too much of it in the data yet, but I think that's because we didn't see some of the comps that I talked about that weren't on here actually in the data yet. I do think as those become more popular and prevalent, we're gonna see a trend here where I'm kind of worried that there's going to be a lot more polarization in this metagame. And the comps that really make me think of that are things like the speed monkey comp, things like the big summons, and even a lot of these frost builds to a lesser extent. It just feels like when you're trying to do something with a even slightly lower tier deck, some of these matchups feel so incredibly unwinnable. I think a great example of this is thinking about Murlocs. Murlocs, have never been a top tier archetype, but at the end of last expansion, there were actually some very playable and pretty decent Murloc builds, even if they weren't the best thing around. They could kind of hold their own against a lot of comps, and as someone who did a Murloc focused stream and tried to make it work a bunch of different times, aside from just kind of jamming them on the bench in a nature focused comp, which went okay, Murlocs just feel really unplayable, and a big part of that is like they can't do anything against a bunch of these powerhouse comps. They can't stop the Elise monkey stuff from going off before you just get wrecked by it. They can't deal with these comps that summon huge boggies and get all this damage resistance. They're not going to do well against frost. Like, it's just the comps that are dominant are so far ahead of things that are kind of more middle of the pack or even tier 2. So I think that's kind of concerning. I hope I'm wrong about this. We're still kind of earlier on, so it's possible things change. People find out strategies that haven't been discovered yet. There definitely needs to be more testing. Obviously, this is the first Meta Monday since the drop. I'm sure things will change over time. We kind of saw that with the Nagas. The Nagas were a really kind of later discovered comp and ended up being one of the best comps of last drop. So I don't doubt that's probably going to still happen, but I do think I'm noticing a trend here of games feel a lot more polarized, and it's not good for the game, because especially with Mercenaries issues with requeuing the same people, when your games come down more to what you picked rather than the plays that you're making, it makes for kind of a bad gameplay experience, because your decisions don't matter as much. It matters more what you decided to click play with and go into the ladder than the decisions you're actually making in the game in each individual matchup. So that's something I hope doesn't end up being super prevalent. We'll see, but I'm not the most optimistic about that so far, and I am afraid that we might see, maybe we'll see slightly more variety in comps, but I think the overall gameplay experience, even though the Mercenaries for the most part are really, I think, well designed and way more interesting than mercs we've got in the past, I think a lot of the designs are kind of a slam dunk, but the problem is I think it's leading to polarization when you combine some of these new powerful designs with very
powerful old designs that haven't really ever been addressed. Just other cards have been kind of pumped up to try and keep their power in check a little bit. And like I talked about in the nerfs video, I think it's really unsustainable to kind of run your game like that. And I think eventually they're going to have to bite the bullet and tone some stuff down, or at least commit to semi-regular adjustments for some characters if they really want PvP to have a chance at being how good we know it can be. But yeah, that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.